Imagine this. It's Thanksgiving evening and you and your family are about to dig into the biggest meal of the year. However, before you can take your first bite, you have to go through the process of hearing what everyone is thankful for. Everyone spouts the usual answers: family, fortune, having a big dick size, stable careers, etc, etc. Eventually, it becomes your turn. Everyone starts looking at you, waiting to hear your obligatory gratitude. Quickly, you sporadically try to think of something that hasn't already been said. Something that is very meaningful to you. Then, after some thinking, it hits you. You stare back at your family, who are continuing to hold their gaze on you. You open your mouth and say,
I'm thankful for Clue Clue Land on the NES.
What's it like to play the Nintendo Entertainment System?
How the f am I supposed to know? The Nintendo Entertainment System is a very, very interesting console in the grand history of gaming, purely because of what it managed to accomplish during its lifespan, and what it represented both during its release, as well as what it still represents today. What do I mean by this? Well, what I'm trying to say is that the NES is one of, if not the, most important console in video game history. It practically allowed for the industry to flourish and grow into what it is today. That's right, you have the NES to thank for Black Ops 7. Now, you might be asking, how did it accomplish such a thing? Well, shut up and be patient, I'm getting there. The history of the NES goes all the way back to the far-off and ancient year of 1981. At this time, Nintendo was primarily a Japanese toy company that didn't have much experience in the video game market. The most they had was their Game & Watch series of portables, which they started producing about a year prior. However, they were extremely cheap and basic, so when compared to the big gaming companies of the time such as Atari, it's like comparing a stick figure to the Mona Lisa. Though surprisingly, the Game & Watch series was actually quite successful, and with the growing popularity of video games as a whole, Nintendo decided to delve more into the industry. Now, Nintendo didn't start making home consoles right off the bat. Instead, they tried their hand at making arcade games. Some were successful, and some were Battle Shark. The most iconic of their original arcade games is definitely Donkey Kong, because, well, you know. Nintendo managed to do fairly well in the arcade world, but they eventually set their eyes on entering the home console market, mainly because it would allow them to make home console versions of their arcade games that would be more accurate than if they were released on, say, the Atari 2600. The development of their first home console started in 1982, spearheaded by Masayuki Uemura. Sorry if I mispronounced that. The development of the system would obviously take a few years, and during this time, many major events occurred in the gaming sphere. The most infamous of which was the video game crash of 1983, where the gaming industry experienced a huge financial and reputational setback as the public grew tired of the quality, pricing, and oversaturation of video games. In basic terms, this was pretty much the Great Depression but for video games. As I said, the game crash was a massive blow to the reputation of video games, especially here in the US. People just stopped giving a shit, and it seemed like the days of gaming were over, a fad that left just as quickly as it came. Then the Famicom released. Nintendo finished production on their first home console by the middle of 1983, as it was first released in Japan in July of that year. Although, it wasn't called the NES yet, instead it was titled the Famicom, or Family Computer. Sure, the design of the console is very unique, as unlike most other home consoles at the time, the Famicom has a more toy-like look to it. Well, you know, obviously trying to fit in with the whole Nintendo being a toy company thing. The Famicom ended up doing pretty well, and it definitely encouraged Nintendo to stay in the games industry, and by 1984, the company wanted to branch the system out to countries outside of Japan, specifically in North America. However, in order to do that, Nintendo needed to give the Famicom a major redesign in order to make it more appealing to the general public in places like the States. So what did they come up with? Is that a toaster? The Famicom finally came to the States at the end of 1985, but with several key changes to make it seem more trustworthy to the video game hating public. First of all, the name was changed to the Nintendo Entertainment System, along with the design of the console being changed to be more geometrically simple and have darker colors. The changes make the NES look like something from a tech store, specifically something like a VCR or VHS player, which was what Nintendo was trying to go for. That way, people in the US wouldn't immediately see the thing as a game console, more so a device that can just so happen to play games. I would laugh, but game companies still do that approach to this day. The Xbox Series X looks like a mini fridge. Wait, the controller also got a bit of a redesign as it was made thicker, grayer, and shaped more like a rectangle. You can probably use that as a yearbook quote. Thankfully, I have an actual NES controller, so I can give some first-hand experience as to how the thing is. The controller is fine to hold, but it's definitely not the most comfortable thing. That's mainly because of the more sharper edges. Would have been nice if they were more smooth like the Famicom controller. The D-pad also feels a bit stiff, at least on the controller I own, so I don't know if that's a universal thing. However, I do like the overall design and texture of the controller. Plus, the B and A buttons are really satisfying to press. I could mash these things all day. At the release of the console, sales were fairly slow, but as time went by, they obviously grew more and more. The NES started becoming a hit in North America, as practically every kid had or wanted to have the console. This growing popularity was also contributed by the way Nintendo marketed the system, as well as the games. The box art of the first couple NES games feature mock-ups of sprites instead of using more detailed artwork like previous consoles. The purpose of this was to give consumers a more accurate look at the game they were buying, as one of the problems with the previous consoles was that you would buy a game with really gorgeous artwork, and then the actual game would look like dog shit. Speaking of the games, what were the NES's launch titles? Tennis, baseball, pinball, golf, Super Mario Bros, Stack Up. Mario made his home console debut with the NES, although, fun fact, this isn't his first game ever. That would be the arcade game Mario Bros. And another fun fact, it isn't that good. Thankfully, Super Mario Bros. Is a much better game, to the point that it became one of the grandfathers of the platformer genre. I can also testify that the game is surprisingly still pretty fun all these years later. It's incredibly basic, in some parts like the sprites haven't aged super well, but I don't know, I still find myself returning from time to time to play it. It's fun to just grab a fire flower and mow down every enemy. Plus, this game has Luigi, so that automatically makes it a good game. Outside of Super Mario Bros., the launch titles of the NES had a large variety of genres, which I'm sure was Nintendo's intention. They wanted the entertainment system in its games to appeal to as many people as possible, so it was important that there were a good variety of games right off the bat. Which is what led them to releasing Ice Climbers and Clue Clue Land. This philosophy was present not only at launch, but also throughout the system's lifespan. Most of Nintendo's releases, as well as those from third parties, are all from different kinds of genres, making it so at least one game on the system is bound to appeal to some fucking weirdo out there. It's also because of this approach to game releases that many of Nintendo's most popular franchises had their start on the NES. The most obvious example is the Big M, but there's also another one. The Legend of Zelda, the very first Zelda game released in 1986, and it has an interesting take on both the adventure and RPG genres. You have to explore a huge map with all kinds of enemies, secrets, and puzzles. Plus, there's various dungeons to explore which have their own puzzles and bosses to fight. This openness the game has is the reason why it was so influential. It honestly feels like a predecessor to the modern open world genre, or at the very least some of the mechanics found in open world games. The NES also received another Zelda game, Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. It's not even Legend at this point, there's just two Zeldas now. This game is a bit different from the first, as it's sort of a combination between the overtop exploration and 2D side-scrolling. This is definitely a result of the development team trying to experiment and figure out what gameplay style works best for the series, mainly because this is one of the only times a Zelda game has side-scrolling portions. Some other examples of Nintendo's franchises starting on the NES are Metroid, Kid Icarus, Excitebike, and the best of them all, Dr. Frickin' Mario. You know what? That makes me wonder, how the f did Mario get a medical license? Does the Mushroom Kingdom have a med school? Although he didn't have a start on the NES, Kirby was also present on the system. Only one game though, that being Kirby's Adventure. This was the first Kirby game to have copy abilities, so imagine my reaction when I learned Kirby's Dream Land didn't have shit. I'm glad they made this edition. It really helped in giving the early Kirby series its own identity. Cause like, now it's just hard to imagine any Kirby game without copy abilities. They have just become that ingrained into the series. You know what? Since we're still on the topic of the NES's games, might as well talk about Mario's other outings, since he had quite the presence after Super Mario Bros. The Mario Bros. Arcade game was put onto the system. F***ing great. Besides that, Super Mario Bros. Got a sequel. 2 in fact. Mario 2 in Japan is very different from Mario 2 here in the States. Now associated with the subtitle The Lost Levels, the Japanese version is unique in the sense that they went really hog wild on the difficulty. The game is notorious for its hard and sometimes really unfair difficulty. In fact, it proved to be so hard that when it came time to release the game in the US, Nintendo decided to just make a whole new game. And by making a whole new game, I mean they took an already existing Japanese Famicom game and retextured it to be Mario. That probably explains why it feels so mechanically different from most other early Mario games. You can't just stomp on the enemies to kill them, you have to grab turnips for some reason and throw them to fully kill them. Sure. Oh yeah, also Bowser isn't the villain. Instead it's this fugly toad named Wart. Also sure. The last mainline Mario game released on the system was, get this, Super Mario Bros. 3. The third game returns to the gameplay design of the first, but with a lot of new concepts and added flair. First of all, the updated graphics and sprites. beautiful. Like, I'm serious, this is one of the best looking NES games. They really get as detailed as they can with the 8-bit graphics. I really feel like the look of this game is the perfect bridge between the simpler 8-bit graphics of the NES and the more detailed 8-bit style of the SNES games. And it's not just the graphics that I think are great, the actual game is surprisingly really in-depth for an NES title. There are whole hub worlds with bonus minigames, tons of secrets with different items, several new power-ups like the Tanuki Leaf, and lots more. I feel like this is the game to cement Mario as a Nintendo franchise that aims to always be really unique and innovative with each entry. Mario 3 goes beyond expectations and is one of the biggest highlights of the system. Anyway, I think that's enough game talk. Now, let's talk about some expensive-ass plastic. To try and capitalize on the success of the system, and to give consumers several ways to play each NES game, Nintendo released a variety of add-ons and accessories to the console. The very first release was the Robotic Operating Buddy, or Rob. Honestly, a pretty fire name. Rob was labeled as a toy accessory for the console. It was actually released alongside the NES. This dude's function is to act like a second player. So basically, he's just a real-life NPC. The future is now. If you don't have any friends, well, you always have your good pal Rob to be there for you. Pathetic loser. Although, funny enough, only 2 games were released that were compatible with the thing. So yeah, safe to say that Rob didn't really pop off as much as Nintendo thought it would. Another accessory the entertainment system had at launch was the NES Zapper. It's supposed to work similarly to those shooter arcade games, where with the gun you can accurately aim and shoot at targets. And just like Rob, not many games were released to work with this thing, as only 4 ended up being made. At first, it's weird to see these accessories that were released alongside the console be practically phased out so quickly, but it kinda makes sense once you start thinking about it. As a part of Nintendo's plan to make the NES look like anything other than a game console, the accessories released helped to make the system look more techy or toyish than, say, a video game thingy. However, once people started trusting Nintendo and the concept of a video game again, they kinda sorta just stopped giving a damn about some of the system's accessories. Now, of course you can't talk about NES accessories without talking about the most iconic one, the Power Pad. Oh yeah, I guess there's also the Power Glove. The Power Glove was Nintendo's first attempt at a motion-controlled controller, as by using different hand motions, you can do certain actions in games compatible with it. But the glove ended up being quite the failure, as you can probably guess that the motion control aspect didn't quite work that great. Man, a motion control controller didn't work great because motion control technology wasn't quite there yet in the late 1980s? Man, who would have thunk? It's been mentioned before that the NES grew quite successful, but it's important to go over specifically how successful the console was. The NES, in a way, had close to a monopoly over the games industry for a while. I mean, they still had their competitors with Sega's Master System and the Atari 7800, but they were incredibly short of the power and influence of the entertainment system. Cause like, everybody in the 80s wanted an NES. The only reason you would even consider getting one of the other guys was if you wanted to be different. Plus, out of all the companies, Nintendo was the one that knew how to please consumers and bring in new ones the most. For example, Nintendo introduced the official Nintendo Seal of Quality. Every officially licensed game on the NES was marked with the beast. The purpose of it was to show the public that every game on the console was of high quality, making it so consumers knew that what they were buying was actually playable. Along with this, Nintendo also had a strict licensing contract that they enforced with third parties. The reason for this was to prevent game companies from just shoving cheap and garbage games onto the system, aka they were trying to prevent shovelware. The contract also forced most third-party games to be either fully exclusive or exclusive for a time on the NES. It made it so that if you wanted to play, say, Final Fantasy, well, you know who to look for in the alleyway. Now, the competition, of course, didn't just take Nintendo's reign over the games industry lying down. Instead, they found their own ways to fight back, mainly with Sega and Hudson Soft, as these two companies were some of the first to make fully 16-bit consoles, hardware capable of better graphics and sounds than what the NES could do. While these new systems definitely did pretty well when they launched, Nintendo took notice of this change in the industry. To keep their success going, the company started production on a new console, one that could outshine every aspect of the NES. They planned on making a souped-up Nintendo Entertainment System, a Super Nintendo Entertainment System, if you will. And thus, this era of Nintendo, and this generation of gaming as a whole, came to a close. In 1991, Nintendo released their next console, shifting all their focus from the NES to that. This marked the overall end of production of 8-bit games, with the release of 16-bit systems creating the 4th generation of game consoles. And that's the NES. Definitely not the most in-depth talk about this system in its life. There are still plenty of things about it in its games that I didn't go over. But you know what, it's still fun to just talk about the basics. Plus, it leaves room open for more discussions in the future. As said at the start, the NES can be considered the most important console in the history of gaming. It practically brought the medium back from near extinction, and it created so many iconic franchises, genres, and gimmicks that were so influential to video games as a whole. Plus, a lot of the system's library still holds up fairly well,
games like Mario Bros. 3 and The Legend of Zelda are really fun and still hold up all these years later. Also, if nothing else, don't be the guy who's thankful for fucking Clue Clue Land, because you'll just get a bunch of weird stares at Thanksgiving dinner. Trust me, I would know.